Welcome to the Midlife Fulfilled podcast. Are you over 40 and ready to truly thrive? Well, on this podcast, we go deep on ways to thrive across the 5 pillars of midlife: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. I'm Bernie Borges, midlife advocate, life coach, and your host. Subscribe now and get ready to thrive. Tim Hughes, welcome to the Midlife Fulfilled podcast, a vulnerable conversation.
Thanks, Bernie. I'm dreading this.
You're dreading this. I know we talked about that in the green room. We talked about actually when we set up this conversation. And so I didn't twist your arm. Well, maybe a little bit. I encouraged you to share your story. Let me kind of tee it up a little bit for the listener. So you and I know each other through the professional circles that we've traveled in over the years. And it's been several years. I don't know exactly how many, but we didn't meet a year ago. It's been several years. And in a conversation we had recently, you shared a story with me that clearly had a profound impact on you, your life. And I think it pertains to your legacy. And as you know, that's one of my 5 pillars, right? Health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. So
Yes.
Tim, I just want to invite you to share that story. We'll have some conversation around it. And I believe it begins with, unfortunately, your father's funeral 2 years ago and something that you experienced. And I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Bernie. And I really appreciate you inviting me on. And I think it's important that we always put ourselves out of our comfort zone. Which is why I agreed to come on, because I actually wanted to. It was interesting. I wanted to sort of to verbalize things as well. So I appreciate it. And I think it's probably about 15 years that we've known each other. But who's
Okay. Time flies.
Yeah. I there's a lot been talk about purpose. And I kind of thought, well, I need to think about my purpose. And I knew when I set up my business 9 years ago, that, there's a saying, isn't there, that there's 2 important days of your life: the day that you're born and the day that you know the reason why you were born. And I kind of muddled along thinking that was my purpose. I knew why I was born. I was born to do what I do. Then my father had dementia for like 15 years. And so in a way I was very lucky, because there's a lot of people whose fathers, they have a heart attack and fall over or whatever. Whereas, I had time to basically tell him I loved him and hold his hand and do all kinds of things, all the things I wanted to do. But when he died, as I think a lot of people feel, it's the end. And a lot of things you suddenly feel that there's a certainty about it. Anyway, the story is that I went to his funeral. I was the person, the youngest son, the oldest one that decided he didn't want us to say anything. So the youngest basically had to stand up and do the eulogy. And it was one of these eulogies. It just came to me, and I don't know. It just kind of wrote itself. It was kind of like quite spiritual.
In the moment? You mean in the moment?
Yeah. When I had to write it, it was like it came to me. It was quite spiritual in the way that it kind of like came to me. This is what is it was if I would say it was as if somebody else was writing. This is what I want. This is what I want to say. Well, this is certainly what I wanted to say. And the first thing I did was I started with a joke, because my father had a great sense of humor. We've all done presentations. So the best way to start a presentation at a funeral is with a joke, isn't it? But the thing was, I did the eulogy, which is about him, and we'll come on to some of that. But what happened afterwards was that there was people afterwards that shook my hand, and they didn't just shake my hand. They basically held my hand like this and said, if it wasn't for your dad, I wouldn't be where I am today. Now, that was a total shock to me. Because, my dad, he was a sound engineer at the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. He went to work. I knew that he worked on certain things. I know that he mixed with famous people. And it was all in a day's work. He'd just come back home one day and say, oh, yeah, I was working with somebody today. Kate Bush, somebody, or it would be something, Yuri Menuhin or something, and it was all in a day's work because he didn't see people as being stars. It was all part of the thing. But the fact that these people were shaking my hand like this was it kind of led me to realize that there was something in it, something more in it. And when I dug into it in more detail. Now, remember, my dad he's been passed away for 2 years. He'd been retired for 30. So we're talking about society 40 or 50 years ago.
Mm.
And also talking about society, we're doing this on the 22nd of January, which is the day after Trump has basically cut all of the DEI things in the US. And one of the things about my father was that I realized he thought that everybody was the same. It didn't matter where you were in the hierarchy, what color, what religion, whatever. He thought, as far as he was concerned, everybody was the same. And he supported people. He did the usual mentoring shit, which is, you go onto LinkedIn and we're all talking about mentors and stuff like that. My dad was doing like 40, 50 years ago. And there were people coming up to me saying, that it was him that mentored, this particular person worked on a particular TV program that used to go out on a Saturday night that was particularly popular. And it was my dad that mentored him to get to that place. And he said, that was my career high. And it's like, and there was also, and you
were hearing all this for the first time. Like these are
yeah.
Most,
and there was
most of these people, Tim, you didn't even know, or
I didn't even know. And the thing was that the eulogy was like spot on in terms of like, of course, nowadays with funerals, after COVID, it's now pretty standard here in the UK that you will have a Zoom link so people can Zoom in as well as attend.
Okay.
And I know that two of the people that basically Zoomed in were people that they were men, and they decided that they didn't want to be men anymore. They were going to be women, and they went through the whole process of going through, having the operation and all of that. And my dad stood up with them. And I know my mum actually said, "Oh yeah, he went. They were going to fire them," because you can imagine the BBC 40, 50 years ago was a very white male, middle class, and for someone to say, "Actually, I'm my name's Peter, but now I want to be a woman," they didn't like that. And my father actually stood up for these people and said, "Well, if you get rid of them, you get rid of me too." And so he also was involved in. He was also involved in Asian music. I've been going through his tapes, reel to reel tapes at Christmas is what I set the job I set myself to, and there's reel to reel tapes there of Indian music because there was a lot of people didn't want to work with. We have a big Indian, Pakistan, Bangladesh community in the UK, partly because we used to have an empire and therefore they see us as being like a mothership. And they wanted their own television, and he was the one that put his hand up and said, "I want to do this. I think it's right that we support them." And all of those, and that kind of all came together for me, and realized that I needed to think about my own purpose myself. So in terms of and I actually have matched that in terms of him, which is I actually feel it's right that we help people.
Hey, it's Bernie, and I'm jumping into the middle of this episode with a quick message. I just want to share something that I'm really excited about. If you're feeling like you're at a crossroads, whether it's in your career or leadership or just personal fulfillment, I want you to know that you are not alone. That is exactly why I'm now offering one-on-one executive coaching to help professionals like you gain clarity, take control, and just move forward with confidence. You see, I've been coaching people for a while now, and someone recently challenged me with this question. They said, "Bernie, why aren't you availing yourself to others as an executive coach so that you can help them like you've helped me?" That really made me think. The truth is, I hadn't looked at it that way before. But after reflecting on it quite a bit, I decided that it was time to make this official. So, If you're navigating a career transition, or you're just looking to level up in leadership, or just need a thought partner to help you figure out what's next, let's talk. I offer 3 coaching programs, and right now I have a limited enough free 30-minute discovery calls available to see if coaching is the right fit for you. No pressure, I promise. Just an honest conversation about where you are and where you want to go. Hey, if this resonates, book your free discovery call. Just visit the link in the show notes or head to the executive coaching page at midlifefulfilled.com. And now let's get back to the episode.
My father used his skills and his platform, the fact that he was a senior sound supervisor. He used that as ability to help other people. So for me, that immediately matches. So I'm going to, I have a skill and a platform. So I immediately see that as a bit way to help people.
Mm-hmm.
Going through his tapes and the way that he helped people also is a way of seeing his legacy. So I'm in the process of now digitizing a lot of those things, and I've actually found he's kept some records of things which at the time for a lot of people probably don't really matter, but sometimes how so sound, acoustics, classical music were all important to my father. And there's a place in London on the South Bank just after the Second World War. We didn't have a lot of money in the country, and it was agreed that we'd have this thing called the Festival of Britain. And there's it's a beautifully ugly brutalist architecture thing called the South Bank, and there you've got Festival Hall, which is where a lot of classical concerts take place. At the time, it was supposed to be the most acoustically perfectly placed in the world. And my dad went there and he did an acoustic test, and I have the letters of him writing to the Festival Hall and saying it doesn't. I'm going to summarize it by saying actually acoustics are rubbish. And I've got the letter of them writing back saying, well, yeah, you may be right. And then I've got the details with the architect right through to, so there's actually this beautiful story about how something that he quite obsessed about and was willing to stand up and put his head over the parapet and say, this is wrong. And I've got to digitize that. And that will be just like me zooming and saying, look at this and look at this and look at this. Because what I want to do is also use my power to create the legacy for him.
Okay.
Because I can do that. So I can digitize his tapes. There's some things on there which I will probably send back to the BBC. The Indian classical music, I'm trying to contact the people that played in it. Unfortunately, one of them has died, and I can't seem to contact them because I just want to say this stuff exists. And go through that process of creating that legacy, just as much as I run a podcast. Right. You've been on my podcast, and part of my podcast is creating a legacy.
Right.
And so one of the things that really emphasized it to me was that at Christmas, sometimes people write letters about what they did during the year, and then they send that in a Christmas card. Because my father was a sound engineer at the BBC, he decided to do that, but tape it. So there are tapes of me about 3 or 4 and my brother who's 2 years older than me. I'm telling limericks. My brother's playing the recorder. And we would have sent that to our grandparents. But it's really amazing to hear his voice from about 1969, 70. My voice from me, trying to read a limerick out of a book,
right,
and not doing very well. And actually that legacy of hearing that spoken word. And I would, recommend to anybody, you may not like the sound of your voice, but actually one way that you can live forever is by recording your voice, because that will last even after you pass away. And I know that Yoko Ono says about John Lennon that it's when they dig up all these tapes and do all these re-releases and that, she said it's always amazing to hear John's voice again.
Right.
So Tim,
A couple thoughts I want to share. At the beginning of this conversation, you said you were dreading this, and what I'm observing, Tim, is that the story you just shared has poured out of you, maybe similar to how the eulogy that you wrote sort of poured spiritually into you, so that you could actually capture it and know exactly what you wanted to say in the eulogy. And what's clear to me, and this is kind of the second time I'm hearing the story, because we discussed it a few weeks ago, which is what inspired me to invite you to come and share the story. And but it really is clear how much of an impact this has had. And something you just said, which I didn't connect this dot in the first conversation we had, and that is that not only do you feel like you have greater insight into your own legacy, but you also want to amplify your father's legacy. So it feels like you've got the motivation to really put your stamp on the world through your legacy with clarity, and also to amplify your father's legacy. Do I have that right?
Yes, yes, and my mother's given me just about loads of stuff. I got all of his stuff, and I'm sort of like going through it, and I have the knowledge and the ability to you and I can create Zoom, sit on a Zoom call, and then upload it to YouTube. So we can digitize his stuff and we can share it with other people. So his legacy is always going to be there as long as YouTube exists.
Right. Okay. So, so this occurred 2 years ago. How has it changed you? I mean, you're still a family guy. You still are running your business. You're hosting your podcast. So you're still doing what you were doing before that experience. But how has it changed?
I think it's created more clarity in terms of purpose, in terms of doing things, and I still have to. Many of us still have to earn a living, but I'm still willing to help people, and I do help a lot of people for free. And it doesn't. That's not a request for everybody to join me and ask for free services. But where I make a call that the person, when someone's contacted me from Africa, they haven't got enough money to pay. I'll just do it for free. And if it's about educating people in Africa to make themselves better people, I'll do it for free.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sort of that reinforces the fact that I was doing that before, but it reinforces my values to say, when that happens, it's okay. You're not actually, because sometimes I was thinking, should I charge them? And actually, no, I'm not going to charge them, because that actually doesn't match my values.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is, I'm not really looking for people to mentor, but looking out over, one of the things I do when I look out over things like LinkedIn or social media is I go there with a view that my job is to encourage.
Okay. Encourage people so that they feel more confident, more achieved.
Yes. Yeah, and so my job isn't to necessarily, quite a lot of people go onto social media to criticize or to throw stones.
Right.
And my job is to go out there and encourage.
Right.
I in a way, I look back and say, well, wasn't it amazing that all those people were willing to shake my hand and say, if it wasn't for your dad, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if at my funeral that happens as well?
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think about this whole topic of legacy? So my observation is that most of us really begin thinking about legacy in one of our midlife stages. And so I'm just going to say, generally speaking, over the age of 40, or maybe in some cases over 50 or over 60. how do you think people should be thinking about that? Not only in the context of their life, but how it impacts their vocation, their relationships. How do we get people thinking about their legacy if they haven't really been thinking about it as much as you've been thinking about it recently?
It's a really good question. I think the first thing is the importance to have the conversation, to get more people to go, oh yeah, I never thought about that. I see that there are certain people who I know who will go through life, and if you think about, we only have a very short time on this earth, and actually, how do we get the most efficiency out of that? And in a way, it's kind of a living after we've passed away. How can we do that? How can we make sure that we still have the influence we have, the educational influence and the mentorship influence? This podcast is a great example of where you're educating people, and as long as the video format is around, this will exist. And so how do we? And so that's the. I'm asking lots of questions back. Mm-hmm. But I went down a path of I kind of know what my legacy is, but in terms of thinking about it, you sometimes it's not obvious. It's not obvious what you do. Or thinking about legacy differently. If you're a builder, your legacy is all the buildings you've built.
Mm-hmm.
I'm terrible for I'm one of these people that we'll drive past a building. I said, oh yeah, I've sold them Oracle financials.
Right.
And so my legacy was selling a piece of software. But actually, because I decided to do something else in my 40s, and I knew that I knew in my 40s I had to do something, because I knew that I worked in the IT industry, and I know that once you get to 50, people are very brutal.
Right.
I've people have said to me, I don't see how anybody over the age of 50 can understand anything about social media. And I can understand why they may think that.
Yeah.
I can ask you and Mark Schaefer and Ted Rubin and reel off a whole bunch of people that are over 50 who actually know quite a lot about social media.
Yeah.
But I did realize that was going to happen, which is why I knew that I had to do some sort of pivot in my life, and I didn't know what that was going to be. And I guess that pivot has allowed me to also do something about a legacy as well.
Yeah. I think maybe we're overthinking legacy. And here's what I mean by that, Tim. I think a lot of people think of legacy as, how can you have an impact on the world? How can you do something that's really, really significant and impact a lot of people? Again, impact the world, right? How can the world remember you? And I think that we should be thinking of legacy in terms of, how can we impact, and then fill in the blank after that, and just whatever is passionate. And it can be as simple as your kids, or one human being that for whatever reason you have an emotional connection. It could be a family or not a family member, but you want to impact either an individual or some immediate family, and that's it. And so we don't need to be thinking in terms of, how can I impact the world? It's, how can I impact, again, fill in the blank, with an individual. Maybe it's a charity, maybe it's a cause, maybe it's whatever it is. It doesn't have to be gigantic and world renowned. It can be anything that you want it to be, anything that's meaningful to you.
Yeah, I think it's a good. I mean, it's that sort of plus one. We've come to that earth. What can we do which is that plus one, which is more than just birth, life, birth, school, marriage, and death. You know, what is it that +1? So my mum's just retired for the second time. She's 87, and she went and worked. She lives in a very small town, that and she helped raise money to have a theatre there. So they do live theatre, they do streams from London West End, and they have a cinema there. And then she's worked 20 years in the box office. So in a way, her legacy is the theatre's called Number 8. So in a way, her legacy is part of that Number 8. Of course, she doesn't do everything to do with Number 8.
Sure.
But you know, as with lots of things, it's a team effort. But I like to think that the people in that small town and from around there, you know, if I was saying to my partner the other day, I said, if there wasn't Number 8, there'd be nothing in the town. You know, you'd have to travel for miles. You know, in I know it's not quite the US where you like to travel hundreds of miles, but you know, they'd have to travel miles and miles and miles to go to see the cinema. So in a way, her legacy is doing that. She was also the top salesman there as well.
Yeah. So in the context of your business, you've been doing it for, let's call it 15 years, right? For about as long as we've known each other, give or take.
Yeah.
General time span. How has the clarity of your legacy changed your approach to business? Because what you've been doing for, let's call it 15 years, you've been doing it with passion, with excellence, you know, with authentic caring. It's not like you didn't care previously about the people you support, always cared. So what's different now? Well, I mean, now since, you know, this experience 2 years ago.
I think it's more about clarity. I think I think kind of the purpose was always there, but it's about understanding that it's come into focus. I think before it was kind of blurred, and I think I was doing things or thinking things because I thought I ought to do it. I run a small company, therefore I ought to charge people. Or you know, and so what's happened is that it's more about I'm going to do this because actually this matches the purpose objectives rather than necessarily the business objectives. And I think that's more. It's more about the focus than
The clarity. Yeah.
Yes,
I like that.
It's the clarity and which kind of sounds really small, but actually it's a big step that's taken from the why am I here? Okay, I kind of know why I'm here, and I have actually been able to change the world. But actually, there's more to it than that.
Yeah, maybe you've heard the expression. I certainly didn't make this up, but I love this expression, and that is, you know, when I think it goes something like, when you slice open an apple, you can count how many seeds are in that apple, but you can't count how many. You don't know how many apples are in those seeds.
Right.
Right. So it's the same thing as we go through life. We might have an impact on an individual, and we might be able to observe the impact we've had on that individual, but we may not know what impact that individual is going to have on others as a result of your impact on that individual. And that's powerful. That's very powerful.
Yes.
Tim, I think we're at a good wrap point here. For, again, someone who said you dreaded this conversation, I think it was really a meaningful conversation. So thank you, first and foremost. Thank you for being willing to be vulnerable and have this conversation. If someone's listening or watching and wants to connect with you, how could they do that?
The best place to get me is probably on LinkedIn. So I'm Tim Hughes on LinkedIn. Or our website is dlaignite.com, which is on the name tag there. Sure.
Well, my listener knows we will link that up in the show notes. And again, Tim, I just want to thank you so much for
thank you for giving me
this conversation, for joining me today for a vulnerable conversation. And I think a lot of people will find the conversation very meaningful to them as well.